The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, when we're doing jury selection, I talked to you about being legal investigators. The object of all legal investigation is the discovery of truth. That's why you're here. The question is really, why are you here? I want to put you at ease through this trial. It's going to be a long trial. It will be a slow burn. There's a lot of evidence in this case. But why is the media here? Look around. Why are these people here? Why are the attorneys here? Why is the defendant here? Gary Farris will not walk through that door. No problem, Judge. Gary will not walk through that door. In this trial, what you have to do is ask yourself, what is the truth? You have to ask yourself certain questions. You do not have to ask yourself, was Gary murdered? He was. The evidence is going to show that. You do not have to ask yourself, was Gary Farris burned on a burn pile? He was. The question you have to ask is, who did this? Who did it? This is a murder. This is a heinous murder. He was shot, killed, put on a burn pile, and burned. The question you have to ask, what the evidence demands an answer of, is who murdered Gary? Now, these people that are here to see the trial, what I want you to do is they're going to follow the evidence too. I want you to look at me. Don't worry about that. Follow the evidence. The evidence demands an answer, and the answer is close. It's at hand. It's close to me. It's close to you. It was close to Gary. If the object of all legal investigation is the discovery of truth, at this trial, what you have to do is you have to shrink the world. When you see the evidence, this is Cherokee County. They don't have a lot of murders. They definitely don't have a lot of murders when someone was shot and put on a burn pile. You shrink the world. And when you shrink the world, you're going to come to one conclusion and one answer of who. Not what happened, not how it happened, but who did it. And she's near. Frank, if you don't mind. If I can get this technology to work, and Megan's going to help me here. I want to move. I want to talk loudly so everybody can hear me, but what I want to do is, as we go through this, be comfortable, be at peace as you go through this evidence. Relax and listen to what there is. I know there's a lot going on, but you are the most important people in this matter. It does not matter what I say. It does not matter what the defense says. It matters what does the evidence say? What does it speak? Let me introduce you to the Farris family. You'll see in front of you there's the family line, the lineage. And you'll see on the screen here there's a photograph. You see Gary. Thank you. You see Gary is in this picture, and this is a happy time. This is Emily, the bride in the middle, a daughter. This was a wedding, I think, about 2 years before the murder, 2016. You see Gary, he's in this picture. He's standing there with his wife, the defendant. Now, there are 4 children. And as you go through this, you're going to probably take notes because you hear the same names over and over again. You're going to hear about the Farris. You're going to hear about the Farris will. Unfortunately for this family is they have drama. They are not a perfect family. My family is imperfect. Everybody's family is. They didn't ask for their life experiences and the good and the bad and ugly to come in. But that's what the evidence is going to show. And I have to present it. I have great sympathy, everybody does, for families like this. But the evidence is going to show what was going on in their family. It's going to be the good, the bad, and the ugly, just like anything else. Most families, however, don't consist of murder. Now, in this family, you're going to see Chris. On the right side of the screen, you see Gary and Melody. To the right, as we look at, is Chris. He's the oldest, probably about 37. On the other side is Scott. Scott's about 35. Chris was living, in many ways, his own life. He was married, had his own kids. You hear about the kids. They're going to be here. You're going to hear about Ella and Addison, the grandkids. Scott was in the military over Iraq. He came back for a while, lived on the property, worked the property, had kind of an agreement with his dad that he would work the land and he would get paid. He didn't have a job really after he came back, and then ended up with the family. But that was his agreement with his dad. Gary was a very generous man, loved his family. So you had the two guys, the two sons, Chris and Scott, then you had the two girls, Emily in the middle, and Amanda beside her. Amanda was the youngest, the baby, if you would. They were probably around 30, 28, around those age. Gary and Melody got married at a young age. I think it was around 20. 38 years, almost 39. They were married for a long time. They were together, Alabama, small family. Gary worked hard. You're going to learn a lot about Gary. You're going to learn a lot about Melody. And what you're going to learn is the evidence is going to show that they're both, I dare say, brilliant. He practiced law, corporate law. He went to the University of Alabama. I think he graduated first in his class. Extremely smart, introverted. The defendant, she liked the life of being married to a rich lawyer. Gary did so well when he was in Alabama. The firm he worked for, corporate law, real estate law, things like that, very successful. They sent him to the Atlanta area here to open up an office for the firm. Did very good. Very smart, worked his way up. I think he ended up being a senior partner. Very smart, loved his job. One thing with lawyers, the longer they do it, the longer they get better at it, the more they get better at it, and they stay at it. But sometimes what they do is they don't interact with, because they interact with people all day long. Oftentimes when they get home, they get close, they get small. And Gary's like that. In their wedding, their marriage, they had some issues that we're going to talk about. And it looks like they were happy here. This is about 2016, but there was a lot going on behind the scenes. Gary, you could set the clock to his routine, his habits. He's one of those guys. The question you got to answer in this trial is not was he murdered, not how was he murdered, but who did it. The evidence demands the answer that he was murdered. He was shot and killed, and put on a burn pile. This burn pile behind his house. His remains were found. Not much. Gary was a big guy, about 6'4", 300 pounds, give or take. About 33 pounds remained. When you shrink the world, no robbery, no home invasions, no enemies, no road rage, nothing like that. When you shrink the world, in a case like this, husband and wife, wife kills husband, husband dies. The answer to the question, who did it, sits right there. Melody Walker Farris. Let me talk to you about their property. They were affluent. When I grew up in South Carolina, we'd say they were rich. They were rich. He made a lot of money. He would make probably hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Sometimes his paychecks, even after you take all the taxes out, $20,000. They'd have profit sharing and things like that. He made a lot of money. This property that they lived on in Purcell, 2511 Purcell Lane, Cherokee County, it's a hobby farm. If you see, there's actually a road coming down Purcell Lane, and you see that white area, that's dirt. They had horses. If you go up the driveway that's along the trees at the bottom, and then there's a driveway in the middle of this photograph, that's to the barn where Scott stayed. Now, the family had trouble. Chris had some issues with drinking. He got in an argument with his mom about a year for this. She says that he said something along the lines that Chris was going to beat her to a pulp, put her in a pine box or something along those lines. That's what she says. No, he says. But they had a problem. Scott got back from the military, was living there, getting money from his dad. Emily was married. She had a husband Millie didn't like. He got in some financial troubles, some legal troubles, criminal troubles. Amanda was young. And they all took money from their dad. Not in the bad sense, but he had money. He was willing to do with it. And he'd give him a hard time. When you going to get a job? When you going to pay this back? Those type of things. But he could afford it. House, I believe it's worth the property more than $1 million. Now, when you go through your notes, you think about this. We know this case, and sometimes we have to slow down because you don't know the places where this occurred. And the murder occurred in this house. The shooting occurred in the house, in the kitchen, down to the basement. Now, as you look at this house, it's kind of unique in the sense that it's 2 or 3 car garage right here. But as you look at this photograph, you'll see the front. If you go to where that pine tree is, you go right behind that pine tree, that's the front. This is looking, if you were kind of looking, if the pond was behind you, you're looking up at what I would call the front, but it's not, it's really the side. I think it's kind of like the east side. But it's got a deck there, and it's a circular deck. And under that deck was where Gary stayed. The basement or the ground level was Gary's domain. That house was the defendant's. She had everything she wanted. It's immaculate. She liked to live the lifestyle. Furs, coats, jewelry, nice paintings, nice furniture, things like that. That was her domain. She was a go-getter. She was tough. She got after it. She cleaned, almost OCD to the point that she cleaned. Her house was beautiful. Gary lived in the bottom. He had a bedroom down there. He had a CPAP. He slept with that CPAP every night. We're going to talk about that. But he stayed down in the bottom. If you kind of walk out, you see where that, it starts to go on the right side. There's an oval where it juts out. Below that is 2 doors. You won't hear me talk about it. You probably hear me chuckle at some point. There's doors that slide open like this to where he would have his couch and his TV and things like that. I call them American doors because right to the right are French doors. Just how I remember. And you could walk out that American doors, and when you come out there, if you turn left, that's where the burn pile is. This is over by the barn looking back towards the house. They had horses. This is a nice property. This is the barn. This is where Scott stayed. Scott stayed on the top, basically being an employee of his dad. Scott wanted the property, loved the property, liked the property, loved the horses. He was invested in it. He was thinking to move on one day and get another job, but he was locked in this property. And he and his mom worked. They may bicker and things like that, but they worked the property. They did a lot of work. And he lived in that barn there on the top. This is back to the house, transitioning back to the house. If you walk in that front door, this is what you see. Now, as you walk in, you're going to see evidence. If you walk in that front door, and I'm staring at the steps. If I'm staring at the steps and I turn right, you're going to go to what I call the kitchen table. If you turn left, there's a bathroom. If you go straight, you're going to go down a hallway to the master bedroom. This is the master bedroom. That door right there, you can walk out and go to the balcony. And that's where that oval porch was. You can stand out over that and look. You can look at the pond. Study room, library, very nice. Very affluent. This is the dining area, looking out towards the pond. Nice. This is the kitchen. This is the doorway from the kitchen to the basement. You go down the basement. To the left here, if you look at the picture, there's that light switch and whatnot, then there's that cabinet. Right around the corner is the steps you come down. It's 12 steps down, a landing, 4 steps down. You come down that landing, you stand right there. If you were standing off the steps, you get off the steps, you look straight forward, you're going to look at that bar. This is looking back from the, kind of to the side of the American doors, looking back towards the bar. As you look at this picture, to the right is a hallway. You go down that hallway was Gary's office, where he'd hang out and do stuff, work. He liked to get up in the morning. Because he was a partner, because he'd been doing it so long, because he had those routines, he would get up and go check email. To say that Gary Farris was a workaholic is an understatement. The man's like a lot of attorneys. Check the emails at night, vacation, it doesn't matter. He's working, he's checking the email, he's busy. He has such patterns and routines you can set your clock by. So as you look here, you go to right's his office. To the left, if you go to the left, there's a hallway that goes to his bedroom. Now, you may want to write these dates down. In July 2018, we're going to focus on 3 main dates. July 3rd, July 4th, and July 5th. You're going to hear us talk about Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Y'all, when I do trials, I am not perfect. I'll mess up names and dates and times. But this is what we're talking about. I'll catch myself and say, I didn't mean 2020, I meant 2018. What we want to do, again, this trial is not about being perfect. It's about the truth, to be authentic. When we did jury selection, you heard me say to be authentic. These are the dates we're going to focus on. July 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And I just want to kind of give an overview of some of the evidence. This is not all the evidence. You're going to hear a lot of evidence, including evidence that we're not going to present. But this is Tuesday, July 3rd. We don't know exactly when Gary was killed, and we don't have to prove that. The evidence does not require us to prove you the exact time that Gary was shot and killed. But we have a very good idea. Tuesday night around 10 p.m. most likely. Last time he used that CPAP was Tuesday morning. A little after midnight, he got on it. He got up that morning and turned it off. And that machine, when they did a search warrant, shows the times. He's not going to bed without that CPAP. He never used it again. We have no reading that was used again. Now, on Tuesday around lunchtime, Gary had an interesting relationship with his family. And they had some good times, but it was also different. I don't know about y'all, but if I go to a restaurant and I see a friend or a family, I'm going to go up and say, hey, Tom, we're going to hang out, we're going to do stuff. Especially if it's my dad. Well, on Tuesday, Scott and the defendant were working, and they decided to go to lunch. They went to Cherokee Ranch restaurant, a local restaurant. While they were there, Gary was already there. He pays his bill, and he leaves, and doesn't say a word to him. And that's not uncommon. Because their relationship is not a touchy-feely type of relationship in this family. That's not this family. They communicate a lot by text messages, emails, instead of just calling and talking. That afternoon, Scott went to a lake house. He was there that afternoon and evening. There's a text asking about sleeping over for Addison, which is Chris's daughter, the grandchild. There's a text from her, from the defendant saying, what about tomorrow night, not tonight? And that was going to show that the defendant loved her grandchildren. If they were close or she could get to them, she would get to them, but not this night. There was a visit Big Daddy and Grandma. That's what they called Gary Melody. Big Daddy, Grandma. Chris and Addison came over that night. Gary was getting the burn pile ready to go. He liked to burn things. He liked to do it. They were there talking to him, seeing what he's doing, and they left that night because couldn't stay, so they went back. About 10:52 p.m., there's a phone call between the defendant and Scott, and it was basically the defendant saying the horses are out, when are you coming home? And Scott's with his friends. He's down at the lake or whatnot. She's calling, when are you coming home? The horses are out. He gets home, Scott does, about 11:30. Sees burn pile's burning. I think it says something along, I see Dad's burning the burn pile, or he's burning the burn pile, or something like that. Wednesday morning, Scott gets a debit card from his mom because he's going to go play golf. He has this thing on 4th of July that he would play golf, he and his buddies. You're going to hear about his buddies, Philip and Ted. That's just what he did. So about 6:15, I think he goes to the door. I think he calls or texts his mom, the defendant, says, needs the card. She comes out and gives him the card. He goes to the ATM real quickly, right down the road, gets some money, and comes back to go play golf. He's playing golf with his friends, Chris and family. They go to the Peachtree Road Race. Chris and Aston, they then go to the Cracker Barrel, I believe, that morning. Scott goes to the lake on a pool party. He's there in the afternoon and evening. The defendant actually leaves for Lake Lanier to go be with Amanda and Chad Bruce. And you're going to see in things here. You're going to see it's kind of this way. And Chad Bruce was the fiance, now husband to Amanda. Amanda Bruce was Amanda Farris. And they go there and hang out, and you're going to hear about that. And at some point, they come back from the lake. Chris drops Aston off at the house on Wednesday night because they want to see and hang out. Now these times may change, I may get them wrong, but you're going to hear the times as we go through. Wednesday night, July 4th, kids around 11 or 12. They come in, they live out of state, they come in, they want to see everybody, they want to see Big Daddy, they want to ride some of the stuff on the property, they want to do things. It's 4th of July, and the defendant wants the kids to go to bed early. July 4th, 3rd, Tuesday, 4th, Wednesday, 5th, Thursday. The defendant goes to Walmart, checks out around 9:30. Scott spoke with the defendant and Amanda about 11 o'clock that morning. Now she goes and gets some supplies and some things at Walmart. So here's 5th is where it breaks open. Scott has got a connection or connect for some golf clubs. He's going to go to the PGA and get some golf clubs. He sees Amanda up at the house, and so he's driving down his driveway from the barn to leave. And he sees Amanda and some people, goes up and starts talking to him. And defendant is asking, have you seen your dad? And Scott can be sarcastic. And he can be hard on his mom. He talks to her. They kind of go back. He says some things, kind of sarcastically. We talk about where's Dad, things like that. And they start looking for him. Now, the defendant starts asking people, are you on the bank accounts or something like that? As in, maybe he's using the funds or the accounts to try to find where he's at. But his Mercedes is at the house. It had been moved. Now, they would say Gary would kind of go away sometimes and just kind of disappear. Now, he was last seen on Tuesday night by someone other than the defendant. So Wednesday, Thursday. Now they're just starting asking, where's he at? They go around the property. At some point, the defendant's behind the burn pile, and she points out to Scott, gets his attention, brings him up there. Something about goats. Did you burn goats? Scott gets to that burn pile. He was in the military. He's proud he was in the military. He tries to take a leadership role when things break bad, and he finds his own father's remains. He calls 911. You're going to hear it. During this time that's going on, a couple of weeks before this, while the cable guy or something was over at the house, Scott saw a .38 pistol. It was in a leather holster of some sort. And he thinks something's afoot. Foul play. Something's not right. He's suspicious of his mom. You're going to hear how he is. And he starts talking about this missing gun. And people are like, what gun? What are you talking about? He starts talking about this missing gun that was downstairs in the basement. 38. Nobody knows anything about 38 or anything like that. But Scott has a suspicion that something's up. He actually says a statement to the effect of, did my mom finally do something? When he talks to a friend. Now the defense is going to point at Scott or other people. But the evidence is going to show it's Melody. No one else. It's her. And what you have to do is follow the evidence. And what does the evidence say? What does it speak? What is the truth? It's not Scott. Law enforcement gets there, they start talking to people, and when they get there, what you're going to see is they get a call to someone in need, emergency services. So they bring the big long back thing you carry people on like a stretcher. They bring all this defibrillator, things like that. They get there. They don't know. They think they're going to find a person back there who had a heart attack or stroke or heat exhaustion or something and pass out. And they get back there and they find nothing but remains. Law enforcement still doesn't really know what's going on in the beginning. They think it was just an emergency. They don't think anything about crime. They start talking to people, and then they realize the conditions of the remains had to burn for a long time. The CSI people at the sheriff's office, they're like, all right, we have to call in an expert, forensic anthropologist, Dr. Gooden. Comes in, and you're going to see what she does. They interview the defendant, they interview Scott, they ask him what's going on. And in the beginning, the defendant, she starts right off the bat talking about, well, Gary had these medical conditions. And then she says his family's got some mental issues. He was suicidal. And she starts laying that foundation of these other things. Any enemies? No. Would the kids do this? No. Anything else? No. Anything missing? No, 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 no. She's laying the foundation. These are the pictures when law enforcement gets there. Dr. Gooding gets involved. They start marking it. And then things change. When they get the remains of Gary, we're stipulated that these remains are Gary. He's actually identified dental records. He's burned up so bad. When they get there, they find in his rib a 38, they think it's a 380 in the beginning, but it's a 38 special bullet projectile. It's in his left ribs. It's front to back, anterior to posterior. It's in his ribs. So now they think he's medical condition, but he's burned up too bad. Then when they're doing it, that's a bullet. Changes everything. There's no gun. We do not know where the gun is. We look for the gun. The missing gun is evidence of consciousness of guilt. Because if it was a suicide, the gun would be right there. If it's murder, you can't get rid of the evidence. Burn the body, get rid of the gun. Things change now. It's a homicide investigation. Now, this family had problems, and they had disagreements. You're going to hear about dishes being broken. There's several instances of dishes being broken. One time, when she's talking about dishes, you're going to hear the defendant talking about, I had some dishes on top of the car and they fell off onto the ground and broke. Scott's going to talk about an incident where his mom said some very terrible things about his dad, wishing terrible things upon him when she broke some dishes because she was mad when she went down to the basement where he lived and got the dishes. He spilled Mountain Dew or something like that. The man loved his Mountain Dew. Loved it. Cigarettes and Mountain Dew. She got so mad that she broke the dishes. Slammed them. Found it in his trash can. A set of dishes. When she's talking, the defendant is kind of all things to all people. That's what the evidence is going to show. It's going to pivot. It's going to pivot. You're going to hear about two people in this case that pivot. She pivots. She's talking, she's smart, she knows what's going on, they're asking questions. She says, at one point, their marriage is not good. They live in the same household, but they're not living really as husband and wife. There are some good times, they try to do some stuff, but they're living in separate rooms, separate floors. But at one point, she comes across and they ask, you've been married to him for 38 years, and if it's that bad, you'll hear about how she describes the marriage and things. Why did you stay with him? I took a vow to him. I took a vow. The evidence is going to show in this case that the defendant is loyal to two people. Very loyal. She's loyal to a man. There's something called prior difficulties. About 10 years before the murder, the defendant had an affair, we believe, with a guy named Ted Wiley. Ted was in a relationship with Gary's sister. They met, they hung out, and they started doing stuff, and the family knew what was going on. They separated, we believe because of this. Gary considered divorce. He didn't do it. They reconciled, but they lost trust. And this is where things change. The whole relationship changed because of this. Now, Gary worked with a lady, probably had a fling or something with her, not to the same degree, years ago. So they both had their issues. But the degree and the extent and the blatantness of this changed everything. And Gary started controlling finances. Her mindset was to law enforcement, I took a vow to him. But you're going to hear evidence in a text message between her and another guy that would shrink the world and rule out. A guy that's a neighbor that met her when she would walk, because she would walk all the time. She's tough. In a text message, when she was upset with Gary, we believe, she's talking about, she said, my response to his fit he threw was, I hope you die alone in a gruesome death. She's asked by law enforcement, she didn't say anything about hoping he died or anything like that. Terry responds and says, there you go, he's going to push you over the edge. I know, and that scares me. Told him finally to go where could not even see or hear him. It would be in his best interest. You're going to see some text messages and things in this. She portrays this, pivots. But an ever constant in their marriage, an ever constant tension is money. She did not like that Gary would use his money the way he did. It's referred to sometimes by people as the Ferris wheel because there was drama. And there was definitely drama. Chris had his issues. Melody didn't really like Chris. Chris would use checking account numbers and credit card numbers and things like that. And he had paid for, coming up to this point, he had paid for a beach vacation. I think rent a condo or something like that. And Melody was furious. She did not like that Gary was just going to go with him. And Gary basically he'd say stuff, but he'd write the check or he'd say, okay. He wouldn't really do anything. It's his kids, his sons. He could afford it. She'd say things like, this is the last straw. I've had it, I'm taking measures. It shows that her mindset is this money, this money, this money. And that leads to this. Bullet in his ribs. They go in the house, they look at the house. These are steps going down to the basement. There's blood. There's going to be evidence of blood and cleanup in the kitchen. Her domain. Down the steps. When you get off those steps, if you take off those steps, you can see it. Scott saw some blood on the floor down there. Law enforcement saw it. They go back and spray Blue Star. This chemical stuff that'll light us up, and you'll see it. You see those 4, 3, 2, 1 placards there? It's a trail of blood. I've circled this so you can see. Down there is a sofa, and there's an ottoman, I believe is the term. And as you get closer, law enforcement found another bullet. We do not know how many times Gary was shot. We know he was shot and killed. We know there are at least 2. The blood trail from the kitchen up there, we believe the evidence is they had an argument. She shot him. He goes downstairs trying to get away. She shoots him again. Whether he was able on his own to get out those doors or she got him out herself. Top to bottom. No home invasion, no robbery, nothing. And that brings us to what we call means, motive, and opportunity. How do you get away with a murder if there's no confession? How do you get away with a murder if there's no video of it? How do you get away with a murder if you try to burn and destroy all the evidence? You don't. When you use your common sense and all the evidence to put it together to shrink the world, and the only reasonable answer is she did it. For example, if they say Scott did it, Scott's not going to shoot us dead when he's paying all the bills. It's a gravy train. That's just not going to happen. Let's first talk about opportunity. The reason why he shrank the world down, and you will see at the times in this case, when he was killed and when his body was moved, when things are going on, the only person that's going to be at that house, the only person is her. No one else. Just her. Sure, people were coming and going, but not when things were going on. The other thing you consider is sometimes in the case, what's strong evidence is deception, mendacity. When you see that, she's cloaked in lies. And you'll see it through the trial. The evidence will show that. Here's some things she says about fires. The context, the common sense, the circumstantial evidence. Gary liked to set things on fire. He liked to burn stuff. I think about 2008, they had another house, Alpharetta, that they moved from to the farm. He set, I think, the backwoods on fire or something at night. Caught him on fire. She hated that with understandable concern. That's dangerous. People are scared of fires. I get it. She's concerned about that. And then in the same house before this murder in 2016, I believe, he set the house on fire from the basement up, smoking cigarettes in the trash can, left them there, and they caught the house on fire. She went after him. She is strong-willed. She has a backbone. She's tough-minded. And she would tell him how she felt. She told investigators things like this. I try to put together some of the things you'll hear. She had gotten so scared of fire after that. She had been just scared of the fire. She was scared to death. She figured Gary would burn her house down. They just didn't leave him here much alone because he would, I think she said, break a steel trap or something like that. She told Gary, don't leave the fire. She told Gary, please don't leave the fire. She told Gary, when discussing dinner, that he cannot go off and leave that fire. She told Gary, you got to watch the fire. She said there's no reason with him. He's a lawyer. He was going to burn it or die trying. Slip of tongue, but that's what she said. That was the opportunity. It's going to be her. Means. Means is how could you have done it? Because the question you're going to have in your mind that's going to boil down to this case is how did that little lady get that big man on the burn pile? She's a cowgirl, farm girl. Her daddy owned a hardware store growing up. She's been around it. She had ropes, leads, straps, tow lines. Did I mention they had a tractor? Means. Necessity is the mother of all inventions. You just committed a murder, you'll be motivated if you have the means. Did I also say tell you they had an RTV? She knew I was driving a boat. Wednesday morning, Scott leaves to go play golf about 7 o'clock that morning. She doesn't leave and go to the lake till around 12 something. No one's at the house. She comes back that night and tells the kids they go to bed early. Motive. In my business, there's nothing new under the sun. You don't have to be smart to be an attorney. You have to have common sense. And when it comes to motive, the question you're going to have is, one is, how did she get him out there? That's the answer. Evan's going to answer that. Why did she do this? Why would a wife, even for a husband she doesn't like, he has money. Well, she'd inherit, intestate succession. She'd get stuff under Georgia law. Even if he died of an accident, she'd probably get more money. Motive. Let me introduce you to a person called Rusty. Law enforcement trying to figure out what's going on. They're at the house, they get consent, things like that. They search her purse and they find, the things you think you find in a purse, but they find this bank card, credit card, debit card, whatever it is, this financial card. And they find the name Roy Barton on it. And so they're asking him, hey, who's Roy Barton? Well, she says, my cousin, Martha Jane, was married to Roy Barton years ago. In fact, in 2014, that's when this kind of starts off. But she doesn't mention Rusty. She's playing it off as Roy Barton Sr. And he's died. And I just had that, forgot it was there, something along those lines. The Rusty Barton, though, the Rusty Barton, is not senior, it's junior. And he's a character. He's reluctant. He's talking about the evidence going to show he's going to change. You're going to be introduced to Rusty Barton, who's from Tennessee, and we're bringing him in. I do not know what he will say on that stand. I know what he said in the past, and he's flip-flop. That's what the evidence is going to show. But you're going to be able to use the law, which is called prior inconsistent statements. You're going to be able to judge when he said this, and when he says this, and when he says this, what do you believe? A little background on Rusty. He knew them since teenagers. I think he knew her when she was 15. Martha Jane, which is her second cousin, but more like a mother figure. She loves Martha Jane. Martha Jane's a good woman, a godly woman. Martha Jane loves the defendant. They were married to Rusty's father. So Martha Jane and Roy Sr. were married. Rusty and the defendant became romantic in about 2014. She was up there helping her, Martha Jane. I think she had open heart surgery. In fact, Rusty actually took Martha Jane to Emily's wedding. Up close and personal. The affair was going on for about 4 years, 2014, 2018, and after. Gary knew about it. There's an email he received that put him on notice about from Rusty's girlfriend. You're going to hear him ask questions about Rusty talking to her, telling her, don't do that. Rusty did internet searches about the wedding rings when law enforcement was talking to him. They would rendezvous in Dalton, which is about halfway from Tullahoma, Tennessee, and Alpharetta. Almost halfway exactly. Exit 333. They'd meet up there. In the beginning, it was monthly, several weeks ago, and then it became weekly. She would just disappear. The family knew what was going on. They had suspicions, but they didn't realize who Rusty was until this broke. They kind of have a 6-month plan. Rusty believed, based on what the defendant was telling him, according to Rusty, that Gary had some esophagus cancer or something, bleeding, something going on, so he was sick and he was going to die. And they kind of had this plan after Gary passed away. Naturally, they would, for 6 months, lay low, and then they would come back and get together. They were in love. They talked like junior high kids in love for the first time, all the time. They had a regular pattern. Law enforcement interviewed Rusty on certain occasions. There's these days where Rusty was interviewed and basically goes from, I don't know anything, and then they press him. We told you in a trial like this, it can be a contact sport. The attorneys can get after it, we can get after it, I can get after it, and they get after it with Rusty. I'll be professional. But they did the good cop, bad cop with Rusty because he didn't want to give up on Melody. And you're going to hear how they talk to him about this is a death penalty case. You can be arrested for this. You can be, what side do you want to be on in the courtroom? All techniques law enforcement use to have someone talk. He talks to them. And they use him in the sense of they would get information from him, and then he was willing to cooperate and record some calls and some things like that. But look at this pattern here. He talked for some time, and in June of 2019, he recants something he told law enforcement in July 2018. And y'all familiar with the first 48 hours? In law enforcement, in this business, you get to someone as quickly as they can because if there's time, they will change. Feelings change. And in the beginning, he says one thing, and then he gives up more and more. It's like pulling teeth. You finally get it out. But he recants. And this is what he recants. The evidence in the case is going to show that when you shrink the world to the only person that had the motive was her, the only person that was home when this could have occurred, Tuesday evening, going in from Tuesday the 3rd to Wednesday the 4th, about 2 o'clock in the morning, law enforcement talks to Rusty and says, all right, what did she say? And he describes it as the last minute, last conversation. And this is what he tells law enforcement. She said, Gary's in the burn pile. No. She said, he is in the burn pile. And I said, what? And she said, he is in the burn pile. I said, do not say another word and do not tell me anything. I do not need to know that. This is what, before the murder's known, anything like that, he's on the phone. The record's going to show that he had 3 or 4 main phone calls during this time. It's going to show that his pattern when he would talk to her was abnormal for this time. There's a phone call, and he says, I talked to her. And this is what she said. He's in the burn pile. This would have been July 4th. Now he comes back a year later and recants. Well, his presence and companionship is with the defendant. Law enforcement gets arrest warrants, goes up to Tullahoma, Tennessee to arrest her, and guess who she's with? Rusty. After she's arrested, she's in jail before she bonds out. There's actually jail calls. And you're going to hear some of those. And we told you there's going to be calls and things like that. And you're going to have to be patient with us. It's going to be a lot of information. It's just a piece of this puzzle. But at the end of the day, it's going to show the defendant. So his past is being arrested. He recants to law enforcement. She didn't say that. I was pressured. I was under duress. I was taking sleeping pills. I was under alcohol. And then she's talking to him on a phone call. And this is just a part. Now, you're going to hear the whole thing later on. But this is what we call consciousness of guilt. The evidence is going to show that she says this, and this is not what an innocent person would say to her lover.
Sure.
No. Well, like a long time ago, I just stopped talking.
Right.
I haven't done anything.
I know that, Darwin.
It's because what you keep talking about, you're going to single-handedly hang me.
Speak the truth. This is what the charges: malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, concealing death, and other, making false statements. We are here because Gary cannot be here. And the only reason we're here is by her hand. Malice murder is the unlawful killing of somebody with malice aforethought. It doesn't mean someone's wicked in that sense, or malice in the sense that is hatred or things like that. It is the unlawful intent to kill. And the judge is going to charge you on that. One shot could be felony murder if they're fighting and she just reacts. 2 shots and burning. It's depraved. Felony murder, the evidence is going to show that even if she didn't intend to, with malice, to kill him, that intent to kill, that she had that gun in it, just went off. Not the case because she shot him twice. That's still felony murder. It's not the intent to kill, it's the intent to do the underlying felony, which is aggravated assault. Pointing a gun at someone or shooting them, and they die. Even if you didn't mean for them to die, it's still felony murder. There's no malice involved. There's no intent to kill. Aggravated assault is just the shooting. Concealing death of another. The law is designed to prevent certain conduct, and the case that you have before you shows what it's designed to prevent. Not only was Gary Farris murdered, and he has friends and family that watch this, that are here, but they were deprived of him. Because she burned him up. False statements because she lied to law enforcement about Rusty. Y'all forget about all this out here. My job, representing the district attorney, is to present this case to you without fear, favor, or affection. your job under your oath is to speak the truth. I talked to you about veritas. You see the word verdict. It's truth, speak. It's the word veritas with dit in Latin, to speak. When you're done with this case, take all the time you need. Forgive me when I bumble through things, when I get sideways, when I'm doing my job. But remember, I am representing a voice that has been snuffed out and taken away. And Megan Frankis and I are going to present you with the evidence. And there's two sides to the truth. That is, where you see the deceit and the lies in this case, that points to who did it. When you see the opportunity, the means, and the motive, money, sex, new life, the truth, as sad as it is, as hard as it is that the defendant murdered and desecrated her own husband.
You ready to proceed?
Ready.
All right, go ahead.
Mr. Weaver, as y'all recall, he did work dire, so I didn't get to talk to you too much. We kind of broke it up. He got stuck with that task in lieu of me doing opening statements. So my name is Michael Ray. Along with John Luke Weaver, we're representing Mr. Farris. Thank y'all for your service. I know that a 3 or 4 excuse me, a three or 4 week long trial is not how you anticipated spending your beginning of fall. So we do appreciate that, and we have worked quite diligently. I've had this case for 6 years now, of trying to whittle it down to what is the most important pieces of evidence to show to you and to present to you, so that you can make a decision in this case. So I don't think we're going to go beyond 4 weeks. It could get done as early as 3, but it might go into 4. But we're definitely going to try to get it moving as quickly as possible. For your jury service, Abraham Lincoln said that one of the greatest services of a citizenship is jury duty. And I think that's very true. It's the equivalent, in my opinion, of voting, because without you, 16 people we have, or if it was in state court, the 6 people we would have, without you, we couldn't do this. We couldn't do our job. Justice couldn't be done. Justice couldn't be done for Melody without you. So thank you for serving. When you act as a juror, or when you're sitting as a juror, in this particular case, and in all cases, you are essentially the conscience of the community. Because you're going to hear this evidence, then you're going to apply it to the law that the judge is going to give you, and you're going to render a decision. Because if you recall, when Judge Cannon was going over the oath with you that he read to you last thing, I know you've taken a lot of oaths. You took one downstairs when there was 120 of you, and then you took another one when you came in your jury panel, and then you came in with the 16 of you and you took another oath. But in that oath that you took an oath to give a truth verdict according to the evidence. And that's what we're asking you to do. And you heard the judge say that it's your duty to render a truth verdict based on the evidence. And that's exactly what we'll be asking you to do. Now, Mr. Fogus, he did a good job in his opening statement. So some of the things are duplicated because obviously when he came in, he didn't know what I was going to say. And when I came in, I didn't know what he was going to say. But I don't want to sit there and regurgitate the same things. But we got to talk about a few things. That one being the indictment. Mr. Fogus did a great job going through explaining it. So just kind of to recap what Ms. Farris is charged with. 1, malice murder. That is essentially, to keep it simple, and we'll go over it much deeper at the end when the judge actually gives you the charge. I mean, we get to argue. What malice murder is, somebody's alive, and I don't want them alive. And they're dead. That's malice murder. Felony murder, I commit a felony act, and it causes that person's death. Like you're trying to rob somebody, you accidentally shoot them, felony murder. That's what it is. In this case, the felony is the aggravated assault. The state alleges that Miss Farris shot her husband, Gary Farris. And that was an aggravated assault. And as a result of that assault, he died. So that's how felony, murder, and aggravated assault are linked together. Concealing the death of another is pretty obvious. There's a little more depth to it when you actually look at the actual elements of the offense, but you can imagine what that is. Somebody has passed away and you have concealed it. Making false statements, that's lying to the police. We always say as defense attorneys, police can lie to you, but you cannot lie to the police. It's actually a crime. So, this case, and you've heard a little bit of it from Mr. Fogus, but you've probably seen on your crime show, because I know from Bordier, a lot of you watch the podcast, the crime shows, the true crime and all that. And you always see defense attorneys talking a lot of time about there's been a rush to judgment in this case. Rush to prosecute the first person that you can get your hands on. Now that wasn't this case. Melody was under investigation on this case for over almost a year, between the 911 call that you're going to hear shortly and her arrest on June 18th of 2019. So there wasn't a rush to judgment, but what we had in this case was different. It was called confirmation bias. And we'll talk more about this in close, but what a confirmation bias is you got a belief and you've got facts. And that belief and those facts merge together. And that's what you believe. Even though you have all of these other facts over here, you just ignore those facts because that's not in your belief. And that's not in the facts that you want to look at. And that is a confirmation bias. You're going to see from the evidence in this case, from day one, the investigation by Detective Hayes and all of the other officers in Cherokee County Sheriff's Office, even the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, the GBI, everything that was done in this case was tailored specifically to attempt to convict Melody of the death of Gary Farris. One big thing you're going to hear, and you're going to hear it a lot, is Scott Farris. You are going to hear the 911 call here shortly. That's the first thing we're going to do. I'm going to play you the 911 call. 13 minutes after law enforcement arrives, Scott Farris is already blaming his mother. He knows nothing. They're not even sure if there is a body on the burn pile. They're not even sure it's Gary. He's already planting the seeds of blaming his mother. 13 minutes. And law enforcement took that into their beliefs. And then they focused their evidence on that. And that is confirmation bias. Now, you heard Mr. Fogus talk about the Ferris wheel, and I'll talk about it too. That this was a turbulent family. The best is, and we'll go through, I have a family tree to go over with you that kind of lays everybody out. But one of them, his name's Chad Bruce. He is now married to Amanda. And Chad Bruce, when he was interviewed, he said, I always called it the Ferris wheel. It's like a soap opera. Something is always going on with Chris, Scott, and Emily. And it's true. All the time. All the time. And I'll talk a little bit more about it. But you're going to see text messages. Gary mad that they're blowing money. Chris can't survive on his own, always needing money. Scott, a grown man, can't survive on his own, always needing money. Coming to get mama's credit card so he can go get some money out. Emily with her turmoil with her new husband and all that. In fact, you're also going to hear that Gary and Melody had to buy Emily and her husband the house up in Tennessee where they live. There was a lot of turmoil in this family. But jumping on the Ferris wheel, first off, who is Melody? Melody was born in 1960. And she was born in Smyrna, Tennessee. And she had a somewhat unusual upbringing, especially for that point in time. Melody was very little, and they moved from Smyrna and moved to Tullahoma. You already heard a little bit about Tullahoma. It's actually where Melody was arrested. That's where Martha Jane lives. That's where Rusty lives. And I'll talk a little bit more about all those people. They moved to Tullahoma, and Melody and her mother, Kay, lived with Melody's grandparents. And that went on for a few years, and eventually Kay Walker met a man named Carl Walker, and they got married. And then they continued, once they were married, they bounced around a little bit. They went from Tullahoma to Nashville, Nashville to Florence, Florence back to Nashville, just kind of bouncing around this North Alabama, Central Tennessee and back down area, just moving around. Then when Melody was a teenager, they finally settled in Florence, Alabama. It's in the north. You've probably heard of Muscle Shoals. It's right there. And that's where eventually Melody started going to high school, was in that area. And so now you're like in the mid-70s, and that's actually when Melody meets Gary Farris. They met when they were 16 years old. They didn't go to the same high school. They actually met through mutual friends at the same church, and they began dating. And they dated through high school, and then in 1970, they got married. So if the 1960, I think it was 79, they got married, because I think Melody was 19 years old. Now, but they get married, right out of high school, and they both go to the University of North Alabama. Melody's there for about a year, and then she drops out. Gary stays on. So Melody leaves. They're still together. They're still married. And she's working at General Electric Credit and Ace Hardware. Her Kay Walker, her mother, Carl Walker, opened up a Ace Hardware in Florence, Alabama. And that's where Melody worked. And you'll hear a lot about Ace Hardware. She worked there for many, many, many years, helping them out with their business. So in 1980, while Gary's still in school, Chris Farris is born. Now Melody is working full-time at this point at the hardware store. Gary's full-time college student. 1983 rolls around, Scott Farris is born. Melody's still working at the hardware store. Gary's still going to school. Now you fast forward a little bit, Gary's graduated, and in 1988, they have Emily. And at this point, they've moved to Tuscaloosa to the University of Alabama, and that's where Gary goes to law school. So they're living there with the three kids while Gary's in law school. And then in 1989, Amanda Farris, who's now Amanda Bruce, she's born. Excuse me. In 1989, the following year, Gary graduates law school, and the family moves to Birmingham, where he works for Burr & Foreman, the same firm that he was at when he passed away. Now, in 1995, the law firm sent Gary to Atlanta. They were trying to expand, have a different office in Atlanta, and Gary was going to be a major part of that. And I think when he actually first got there in 95, there was only him and another person there. It wasn't, this huge law firm, at least here in Atlanta, at that point in time. So 95, you got 4 kids, really ranging from kindergarten to Chris, at that point in time, being about 15 years old. Melody's a stay-at-home mom. She's going back and forth to Florence to help her parents with a hardware store and just living. And an interesting point then comes later in 1997 to Melody is Carl Walker, who she thought was her father, passed away. And while she was at the funeral, a relative came up to her and told her that, just so you know, Carl Walker's not your father. And so then that leads on to her trying to figure out who her actual father is. And she does. But Carl raised her. It's just an odd thing, to kind of come out of the blue in 1997 at his funeral. Now in 2013, it's kind of the next major event. That is when Gary and Melody buy the Purcell Lane house, where you saw the photos in Mr. Fogus's opening of the house. That's when that was purchased, 2013. They move in there, and when they get there, shortly thereafter, Scott moves in to the apartment that is above the barn. Now, all the kids, they also have kids and wives that are relevant to this case. And Scott was married to Jenna. And her name was Jenna Farris. Since Gary's death, my understanding is they have divorced. She has changed her name. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. I haven't talked to her to figure out how she pronounces it. But that is, Jenna Farris was her name. Chris also has other children by another woman, and that is Farris and Farris. Well, at the time in July, the 3rd, 4th, 5th of 2018, she was over at her friend's house, house, and was over at Melody and Gary's house on the 5th, on the 4th. She came over after the lake. And I'll go through the timeline. This is Chris Payne. With the prior difficulties of the family, Chris Payne was a little bit of that. And Amanda is married to Chad. Chad's the one I was telling you about. He's the one who talked about the Ferris wheel and about how there's always something going on, and basically this family is like a soap opera. That is Chad. And Chad also has a daughter by another woman, and her name is who was there with on the 4th. Now, let's talk about the timeline. So, you already heard a lot about the burn pile. So, Gary did start the burn pile on July 3rd. Okay, we know that. That's a fact. Also, a couple of other interesting things happened. Don't live in Georgia. All right? Those are Chris's children. And do not live in Georgia. They live in Maine. On July 3rd, they flew in to Hartsville, Jackson. Chris went and picked them up, and they drove up. They came to Melody and Gary's house. Had already been dropped off in the house, and came with Chris to see Melody and Gary. And they see both Melody and Gary. Now it is, and I'll go into it more here in a moment, there is some contention about what says how the house was on the 4th, but we'll talk about that here in a minute. Now on the 4th, that is when Melody goes to Lake Lanier. You'll see, and the evidence will show that we've got a parking receipt. I actually got two things. We've got a parking receipt from Lake Lanier that shows the time that she went in. There's also a ATM slip that was in her card that we got photographs of to show that her withdrawing money, and that was on the 3rd. And we'll talk about those here more in a minute. July 4th, that is when spend the night at the house. Now, the evidence show they had two different versions of events about how it was. It was kind of weird. Melody didn't want us to go outside. She made us go to bed early. Will testify that they did go outside. They went and saw the horses. Nothing was weird. We actually snuck out of the house at 10 o'clock, went to the hot tub, were in the hot tub for a while, came back in, went to bed. Nothing really out of the normal. The reason, and you'll also see that some evidence from, there's a text message to Melody from that says, hey, can we spend the night tonight on July the 3rd? And Melody responds, says, no, not tonight. And we'll have to uncover the reason for that, due to the evidence. I don't want to speculate here as to what that was. But we do know that that is true. She said, no, not tonight. And she spent the night the following night after they got back from Lake Lanier. On July 5th, that is where things with this case get interesting. The remains are found on the burn pile. Now, that day started, Melody grocery shopping, the kids are there. But to sum it up, what it's really going to show is the girls wanted to ride the RTV. Melody says, go downstairs and ask your grandpa. They called him Big Daddy. Go downstairs and ask him. He's not there. I don't know where he is. So they start looking for him. Eventually, Amanda comes over because what originally the plan was is Melody, Amanda, they were going to have a day together. They were probably going to go eat lunch. Had talked about potentially going to get their nails done and basically just having a girls' day together. Now, when Amanda got there, they all began looking around the house. Can't find it. Gary's nowhere to be found. His car's still there. But none of this is super out of normal. Gary was a workaholic. Sometimes he would take Uber so he didn't have to drive. He essentially would be gone for days. He may come home, he may not. And we'll get into their relationship here in a minute. So no alarms were really raised at this point. Now, Scott comes over, and that's where things do get interesting. When Scott gets there, he comes in the house and immediately goes downstairs. After proclaiming to the family something along the lines of, "Where's the gun?" And he goes downstairs, then returns and says, "The gun's gone." Now let's talk about this gun. I call it the magic gun, because Scott Farris is the only person to ever see this gun. There's nobody else, it's only him. You'll hear evidence that he found it in the drawer while he was looking for a remote to help the DirecTV man. And then he found the gun. He gives a very detailed description of it. And that's it. Nothing else. And this was a few months before July when he had the DirecTV. Actually, I think it was the beginning of June, so about a month before is when Scott sees this gun. And he claims he has no idea, he's never seen this gun before. It's very strange, this gun is here, and he didn't know anything about it. But he also didn't do anything about it. Now, 6 years later, this is where Jenna Farris kind of comes in and is interesting. 6 years later, she gives an interview to the district attorney's office claiming she also saw a gun in the basement that you saw in Mr. Focus's opening, where Gary was. However, this gun looked completely different than the one Scott described and is in a completely different location than where Scott said it was. So these are the only two people that have seen this gun, and the guns they described don't even match each other, and one of them talked about it 6 years later. Now, after Gary's remains were found, he was taken down to Georgia Bureau of Investigation Forensics Department to the crime lab, and that's where an autopsy was performed. But after July 5th, 2018, 348 days go by. Melody's not arrested at this point. She's interviewed several times. I believe the evidence will show that, or I believe that the state will be playing those interviews for you, so you'll actually see Melody testifying and answering law enforcement questions. But 348 days pass. Now in that 348 days, you'll see evidence that they were doing audio testing. What that was is they put a ballistics dummy in the living room of the house, and they shot it with a revolver. And they had members of the Cherokee Marshal's office, as well as some sheriff's office, out there with decibel readers at different points. They were out at the barn, they were out by the road, and they were also in the house, measuring what the decibel was for firing this revolver into this ballistic dummy. And then they moved the dummy downstairs, and they shot it a bunch of times downstairs. And you're going to see all this. They're going to play all the videos of them doing the shooting and recording the sounds and all that. Diving in the lake, you're going to see they brought out the Cherokee Sheriff's Department to dive into the lake to see about where the gun was. Didn't find anything. Recording Melody's phone calls, and we'll talk more about this momentarily. Rusty, because you already heard about him, agreed with Detective Hayes that he would put some kind of app on his phone and record all their phone calls. And he did, for months. You're going to hear a lot of those. Also, during that 348-day time, Scott and Chris are interviewed several times. Sometimes Scott and Chris are interviewed together, at least on one occasion, and several times Scott is interviewed alone. And then, on June 12th, over 11 months later, the crime lab issues the autopsy report, saying that Gary was the manner of death and the cause of death. Well, the cause of death was gunshot. The manner of death was homicide. And it took them 11 months to issue that report. You'll see, especially when the forensic pathologist who did the autopsy, when he testifies, they weren't waiting on anything. They knew that it was Gary. The forensic, the dental forensics had already come back. It was already Gary. But for some reason, unknown, and you'll see this happens a lot in this case, there's a lot of unknown, and we'll talk about that. No idea why it took 11 months to issue the autopsy report. No idea. But 6 days later, Melody gets arrested. And Mr. Focus is right. She wasn't in Tullahoma, Tennessee. She was up there with Martha Jane. They called her and said, hey, we got an arrest warrant for you. And she came and turned herself in. Nothing to hide. Now, John Luke and I came up with this. We didn't come up with it. He had gone. We were been a long day already, so he was done for the day, so he left. And he went up to the drugstore, and there was a girl in there. And the drugstore, I don't know if our office is in downtown Jasper. And there's a Jasper drugstore. It's right on the corner on Main Street in Jasper. It's being sold, and they're doing renovations. And he went in there and asked them a question about something, and they didn't know. And they go, sometimes the greatest questions go unanswered. And he was like, oh, perfect. Brought me out of my slump. Now I know what I'm dealing with. So that's kind of what we've been talking about the whole time with this case. Because so many things you're going to be asking yourself so many times in this case. How did this happen? How did this happen? How did this happen? And nobody knows. You can guess. Nobody's going to know. So let's talk about some evidence and questions without answers. So evidence, Melody and Gary. It is no fact, I think also, Melody and Gary affairs. It is common knowledge that they had affairs. People knew. You can even, the grandkids, the evidence will show that even they had their suspicions and pretty well knew that, there was, affairs happening. Melody did. Yeah, she was having an affair with Rusty. Gary did. He brought, when they moved here in 1995, Angela Phillips was his secretary. He brought her with him from Birmingham to Atlanta. And she was his secretary for 28 years. And she's a bit hesitant to talk about it, but I believe you'll be hearing from her about how they did have a relationship. Gary was also having a relationship, at least somewhat by text and email, with another woman who worked in his building named Joanne Ward or Joanne Hill. So, and you'll also hear Ted Wiley. Okay, they had affairs. They lived completely separate lives. In the house that Mr. Focus is showing you, in that house, Melody lived upstairs. You saw the house, and it may not be in evidence, but you saw it. That place looks like Southern Living magazine, decorated to the nines. Melody did all that. She lived upstairs. Gary lived downstairs. It was just how they had done it. It had always been that way for years, ever since the 90s. They lived two separate lives. They would sometimes go days without even seeing each other, without speaking to each other. They didn't really talk, didn't really communicate. They did. They had kids. So they had to have some interaction together. They went and saw Emily and Chris's daughter. Her name's Olivia, when she was born. They still did Christmases together. So they did some of these family things together, but for the most part, they were just married people who did their own thing. And Melody did her thing, and Gary did his thing. And it was just what worked for them. Now, granted, with the affairs, it wasn't something that was flaunted in their faces. You try to keep some level of discretion. But it was known. And it was just how they lived. Now, Melody's interviews, I expect that you'll be seeing those interviews. And really, the only thing I want to point out with that is Melody is very blunt, very to the point. She's just who she is. She's a hard woman. And that's how she comes off, and that's how she is with law enforcement. She's very matter of fact. Here's what happened, here's what I was doing. That's just how she is. But one of the most important things that she says in her interview is in the very last interview that she ever gave to law enforcement. Last thing she ever said to law enforcement was, "I just want my family back." Forensics. There's a good bit of forensics in this case. Some is pretty interesting. I want to talk to you. I didn't want to do any of the photographs, but those blood drops that were talked about by Mr. Vogus, you're going to see that there is blood. Well, let me back that up. You will see there is a substance leading down to the basement. You're going to hear from the GBI Lena Coffee. She sprays Blue Star, which is a substance that is supposed to reflect when it's blood. Now, that's a whole nother thing. You're not going to hear anything about that being tested, of whose blood it is, even if it is blood. Now, you go down the stairs. They did take a swab, but they find some little drops of blood. Some of them are about as small or even smaller than 1 centimeter on the floor. Take a swab of those, send it off. That was Gary's blood. Those blood trails never lead out of the house, upstairs or downstairs. You also, the bullet. We're going to be talking a lot about the bullet, how there's no textiles found on the bullet that is found in the basement. We also have our own forensic pathologist who will be testifying about what his opinion is regarding the manner and cause of death of Gary. And we may also end up calling an additional ballistics expert, depending on how things play out with the ballistics experts that are going to testify for the GBI. But that is just a wait and see. Text messages. The text messages to Terry Braswell. Mr. Fogus said that in his opening, the "Hope you die a gruesome death." It is a text message. We expect Terry Braswell to come in here and testify. We'll be able to cross-examine him about that text message. However, we do know one fact, is that text message was sent 2 years before. So it wasn't something that was done in July of 2018 or even June of 2018. Years before. Especially to see text message between Gary and Scott about their tumultuous relationship, especially involving money. Gary sending Scott, "I better have my debit card back." Also see Melody and Scott, they used to text back and forth a lot. And recorded phone calls. You're going to hear all those calls with Rusty. Now, also with finances. Now, while that house was very nice, and it was like $1 million house, and it's decorated to the nines. And yeah, we've actually got some of Gary's pay stubs, and after taxes, he was bringing home $20,000. Can't remember if it was every 2 weeks or every month. But that home, mortgage to the hilt. Debt high, cash low. Gary stopped working, this family's over. And that's exactly what happened. Gary passes away, you're going to hear, first thing that happens to the house, foreclosed. Didn't have enough money to pay for it. Cars gone, everything put in storage. So while they made a lot of money, they blew a lot of money. Now Gary did have some good investments. He had a 401k with his law firm, 401k, profit sharing with the law firm, insurance, life insurance, things like that. But all those aren't accessible cash that you can use. So Gary had to keep working to fund this lifestyle. Now, questions without answers. Where was Gary shot? When Dr. Gooding testifies, she's going to have a drawing of a skeleton. And it's going to show the ribs, and it's going to show he was shot somewhere here. Is it the front or in the back? Not going to be able to tell you that. Angles, don't know. No idea. Also, that's just where was he shot on the body. Where was he shot in the house? The evidence is going to show, while there may be some blood, and that was not tested, so we'll call it maybe blood. Upstairs in the living in Melody's portion of the house, we'll call it, and a trail leading downstairs to Gary's portion, we'll call it. You're also going to get evidence from most likely from Amanda, how a few days before July the 3rd, 4th, 5th, that Gary, excuse me, that Gary had been bitten by one of Melody's dogs on the ankle and was bleeding as he walked down the stairs down to his room so that he could stop the bleeding in his ankle. And that's where the blood came from. But where was he shot? No idea. How was he put on the burn pile? You're not going to hear about that either. You're going to see photographs of tractors. You're going to see photographs of RTVs. Probably of horses too. But you're not going to hear anything about Gary being moved on one of those vehicles. You will hear, though, that there was one drop of blood that was Gary's on the step getting up into the tractor. There's nothing in like the bucket. One drop of blood on the tractor. Where is the gun? Don't know that either. Now, you're going to see photographs of guns. There were guns on the property. There was no .38 found on the property. I think there was an old .32 caliber that was found on the property, but we know that wasn't the gun in question. But what you will find is that Scott has quite a bit of .38 caliber ammunition in the barn, and in fact, he's got it in his bedside table. But yet he claims, and when he testifies, I assume he will be claiming the same thing, that he does not own a .38 caliber pistol. He will claim that he owned a .357 Magnum at one point, but that gun had been stolen years ago, and he didn't have anything that would shoot a .38. Yet he has at least one full box of .38 special ammunition and a loose several other various brands of .38 special in his nightstand. And you'll see all those. You'll see the photographs of those. But where is the gun? No idea. Where are the bullets? They're in Scott's house. Scott's behavior. From the very beginning, like I told you, from the very beginning, Scott is saying, Melody, Melody, Melody. I thought she would do something. Leading law enforcement down this trail. And you're going to see all that. It's going to be very evident of what his intentions are regarding his mother. He does it in his interviews, and he's going to do it on the stand here too. I would suspect that's exactly what he's going to do. But the most important thing is just in that few minutes of getting there, he's already talking about guns being missing that he's the only person that has seen. Then he goes out looking. You're also most likely going to be seeing, there's a trail camera that was, if the burn pile was where I'm standing, was kind of, don't exactly know how far, but down closer to the lake. Kind of pointing at they had a deer feeder down there to take pictures of the animals. And you're going to see that coming up to that camera, for some reason, and I don't think we'll ever get a straight answer, we don't know why those photographs got deleted. Or actually who actually deleted them. Now we know because they were recovered. So we know what photographs were on them, but we don't know of who deleted them. Now, you heard the judge talking about, before you took your oath, about what reasonable doubt was. And he said that reasonable doubt was a doubt of a fair-minded and impartial juror honestly seeking the truth. Then he also went on for a little bit and talked about if your minds are unwavering, unsettled, or unsatisfied, that is a doubt to the law. And with that, you should acquit the defendant. So essentially, when you're looking at this case, whenever we had done, when you're evaluating this case and you're evaluating all the evidence, you got to say, has the state proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt? What a reasonable doubt is that you have a doubt that you can put a reason to. And it's reasonable. It is a reasonable doubt. Now, that is a high burden for the state. Now, I'll go over this and close. I know it's like how it shows that even if the state can get to reasonable doubt, no, that's still an acquittal. That's still not guilty, because they have to go beyond reasonable doubt. And remember, that is just a doubt for which you can put a reason. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you have, like in this case, when you have questions that go unanswered, when we're talking about unanswered questions of how did we get to the burn pile? Where's the gun? Where's the bullets? Where are these simple things that we should be able to find? And why, when we find them, they're in a place that, well, we don't like where that's going. Law enforcement saw the bullets over in the barn. Yet here we are with Melody charged with malice murder, felony murder, ag assault. Nobody heard anything. You're not going to hear anything about this case that Melody heard, or that anybody heard Melody shoot him, or that she admitted to somebody that she shot him. You did hear from, and you'll hear from him again, from Mr. Barton, from Rusty, that he said, Melody said he's on the burn pile. And what Mr. Barton changed, and he'll be under direct and cross-examination in this case, is what he changed. He didn't change what she said. He changed when she said it. So he said, yes, Melody said they found him on the burn pile, not on the 4th. It was on either the 5th or the 6th when she was talking to him saying, hey, they found Gary dead on the burn pile. Rusty didn't change what he said. He told him when he said it. He got it wrong, and he corrected himself. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you have unanswered questions in a case like this, really the only answer is not guilty. Thank you.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.